And I love language. I love words. And I love solving clients' problems, which is what I was able to do at the other company. So I thought, this is my moment. I am going to start a translation company and try to do it better. And that was really the impetus for starting the company out of the NYU Business School dorm room.
All right, Liz, it's so great to have you here on the Learning Leader Show. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's so great to be here.
I read that by the time you were 25, you had lived in 5 countries and had studied 4 languages. Tell me a little bit more about your upbringing and what made you live in so many countries and learn so many languages at a young age.
Okay, thanks for asking, Ryan. So when I was little, when I was
Yeah.
8, my family moved to Portugal, which was wonderful. My dad actually got the right to open Kentucky Fried Chicken in Portugal back in the 1970s, which was an amazing opportunity for him. He was very entrepreneurial and he loved the idea of living in a foreign country. So we
The
moved.
first
I lived,
KFC ever in Portugal?
yeah, great question. Yes, it was literally to take
What?
KFC to Portugal. That because
What a
he had
cool
been
thing to do. How did he get that?
right, great question. So he had been on the marketing side. He was in marketing, and then he had moved over to advertising, to gray advertising. But through a connection he had made, I think at the marketing company, he got the Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise. The company that owned KFC, Hubline, at the time, gave him that opportunity. So what was so crazy is right after we moved there, the Portuguese Communist Revolution broke out. So it was a terrible time for an American company, an American fast food franchise to be brought over there. They were very anti-American, anti-capitalism with the revolution. So unfortunately, it was dangerous. It was a beautiful place to live, but our mail was opened, our phones were tapped, and there were crazy demonstrations going on right outside our house. So we needed to move home after about a year. But I loved the experience because I got to learn for the first time in my life foreign languages. I learned Portuguese, I learned French. I went to 2 different schools. It was amazing. And that really is where I began my love for languages.
Wow.
So,
Okay. So that was
yeah,
the start of it, the KFC,
yeah,
Portugal, but there are other countries and other languages. What happened next?
yes. So then moved back to the US for a year. And then my dad got the opportunity to move to Toronto, to Canada, because he wanted something else international. And at that point, that's what they gave him, and it was safe. It was a good place to be with a family. So we moved to Toronto, and I continued with French. And then in high school, I started studying Latin and Spanish. Languages were clearly my passion. They were my favorite subject or subjects, and I just ran with it. So much fun. And I had really discovered that back when I was in Portugal, but then continued with that and always loved languages, always loved quotes. So loved the English language too. And my father and I would talk about our favorite quotes in the end of high school. And actually something that was really special to me is as my graduation present, when I graduated from high school, when I was 17, my dad gave me this beautiful picture with made calligraphy of our favorite quotes that we had discussed over the years. He had it made with our favorite quotes. And today it still is in my office on the wall. So just
Mm,
related to my love for language.
very cool. Do you remember what are
Thank
some
you.
of the favorite quotes that are in that great keepsake gift he got you?
Oh boy. Okay. Be enthusiastic. Smilers always win and frowners always lose. Honesty is the only policy. When you meet with triumph and disaster, treat those 2 imposters just the same,
Hmm.
which is a really great one. And then finally, there are more, but the one on the bottom that ties it in together is above all, to thine own self be true, and as must follow as the night, the day, thou canst not be false to any man. And that's Shakespeare. There are a bunch of others, but yeah, just related to, you know,
Yeah.
language and
What
quotes.
is it about language that you love so much?
Yeah. I loved speaking foreign languages because I feel like it's fun. It's like acting. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And then I just loved meeting people who were native speakers of that language who had such a different background from me, such a different upbringing or life than me, but connecting with them. And so, of course, that later led to what I wanted to pursue as my career. But yeah, just love connecting with people with such different backgrounds and doing it in their language.
I was going to say, it feels like I've been in countries where I don't speak the language, not even a small amount of it, whether it be over in Europe, and you do feel blocked out from that world because there is such a communication wall because they don't necessarily speak great English or no English, and I don't speak their language. And it does feel like you're just distant, even though you're close to people. And I could imagine that there's a lot of motivation to be able to get closer to people by learning to communicate with them.
No, you're so right. And yes, you feel like you're entering their world. I remember I
Yeah.
once had a Spanish professor in college who said, if two languages, two different worlds, if three languages, three different worlds. And it's so true. And that's, yes, another reason speaking a foreign language is so wonderful.
So that kind of sets the framework for what you would eventually go on to do. And I believe I read that you started your business in a dorm room, and that business was probably built based on your life experiences. So certainly family members to thank for putting you into multiple places all over the world, speaking different languages. What was that beginning, that the origin story of your business and why you wanted to get it started and how you got it started in a dorm room?
Yes, great question. Okay, and just quickly, I did then do my junior year of college in Spain, and then I lived in Venezuela right after college. So just as far as the other couple countries that I lived in, so I really took on Spanish as my favorite, my preferred language. But related to your question, after Venezuela, where I lived shortly after college for several months, I came to New York. And at that point, I thought, okay, now I need to find a real job. It was the same year I graduated, and it was time. I ended up getting a job at a company that at the time was the world's largest translation company. It was only about 90 people, but it was an amazing company in a lot of ways. I remember this was in 1987, so a million years ago. I walked in, there was a Macintosh computer on every desk, which looked very high tech at the time, I remember, but loved the company, loved what we were doing there, but I thought it could be done better. First, I was on the production side, and then I moved over to the sales side, and I saw what clients needed, and I saw what we were capable of doing, and I kept thinking, we can do this faster. We can deliver higher quality. We can have more deliverables. We can spoil the client with service. So anyway, I just kept that idea in the back of my head. Then after 3 years there, when I thought there was really nowhere to go in the company, no way to move up, I went and got my MBA from NYU Business School. And shortly after graduating, and I can tell how I had this aha moment, I will tell you what happened. I thought after graduating, I will try finance. I know I love the language industry, but I need to go get a real job and learn while being paid before I deplete the lack of savings that I have, the little money that I even have. So I went and I did get a job doing equity arbitrage in a French bank. I thought, great, I can combine finance with my love for that which is international. And that was the thing to do back in the early 90s, finance, investment banking. So I walked in, and the first thing I thought was, oh my gosh, I'm the only woman here. And it's all guys and me. I thought, okay, that's okay. I love men. I love guys. I can do this. I did. But then the first thing that really started happening, just even the first day, was whenever the phone rang, everybody would yell, Liz, phone. Like I was the one who needed to answer it because I was the woman. And I realized this culture was not for me. It was very much a boys' club. I felt very uncomfortable. I tried to stick with it. That became a real issue to me. I didn't like the culture of the company, and I had really loved the culture at the other company. Secondly, I realized I didn't love finance. I didn't love numbers and number crunching and putting numbers into spreadsheets. And I love language. I love words, and I love solving clients' problems. which is what I was able to do at the other company. So I thought, aha, this is my moment. I am going to start a translation company and try to do it better. And that was really the impetus for starting the company out of the NYU Business School dorm room.
It's one thing to work at a company who's basically doing the thing that you want to do and trying to work your way up to potentially make changes and make that company better. It's a completely different thing to say, no, I'm just going to start my own version and compete with them and beat them. That's wild to me. I can't imagine doing that. What gave you some of the guts and the willingness to go for it at such a young age and so little amount of experience to say, not only, because it would have been much easier for you just to go work for them and probably get promoted and do quite well, I would imagine, but to say, no, I'd rather start my own thing and compete with this big company where I previously worked?
Yeah. And the good thing is I had done that. I did it for a few years and I wasn't sure where I was going to go within that company. I think that definitely was a fact. I also saw room for improvement that I thought I wouldn't be able to make happen at the other company. And I really did see a need. I thought clients needed other things. There was a real gap between what clients needed and what was available at that company or in the industry. I felt there was room for a one-stop shop, as I said, but a top tier company along the lines of a high level or huge law firm or investment bank. And I thought that was what was needed. But related exactly to your question is, I just didn't know any better.
Sometimes being naive is a good thing, right?
Yes, ignorance is bliss, right? I think I had not a whole lot to lose, nothing to lose really. I had my life savings, $5,000 in the bank from all the jobs that I had. And I had a lot of jobs from the time I was 10 on. I had that. And then I had a credit card that I thought maybe I could get a little advance on, but I just wasn't giving up much. I had nothing really to lose. And I think I'm a huge proponent of people starting companies when they're young, when they're single, when they don't have kids, and they don't have the kind of responsibilities and commitments and costs that they have later. So that was helpful. I think it's also great to start a company later. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's a wonderful time to do it when you don't have a lot to lose.
So you get the business started, and I feel like one of the biggest wins I read was at J.C. Penney. Were they your first $1 million customer? Is that right?
Oh, yes. Thank you for reading it.
Was it?
That. Yes. Okay. You are absolutely right.
What happened between starting the business and getting your first, which had to be so sweet, your first $1 million client?
Oh, yes. And it was so sweet. And a lot happened. There we were in that NYU Business School dorm room, which was not a good place to be and not where you want to have a company, not where you want to live, none of that. And so the goal was to get out of that dorm room within 6 months, because quickly learned through some crazy experience with roaches, with clients showing up out of nowhere, that we needed to be out of there. So it was all about goals with deadlines. And that's one of my biggest points. I'm such a believer in setting goals with deadlines and holding yourself to them. And that's what we did, and made 300 phone calls a day. And back then sent out 300 letters. And now it would be emails, or it would be probably doing a certain amount on social media or whatever. And also going to trade shows and just pounding the pavement and selling, and reaching everybody we could possibly reach, and working crazy hours in the process, 100, 120 hours a week, 7 days a week, to get it off the ground, to get that first $1 million client. So that was really what happened. And at the end of 6 months, we were able to have the revenue, because it was just focusing on revenue sales, move in to our first office. And it was shortly after that that we were able to bring in that $1 million client, J.C. Penney, which was wonderful.
How did you get them?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so what happened was they needed a translation company because they were expanding into Mexico and Chile. So 2 Spanish-speaking countries, and they were going to open a lot of stores in Mexico and Chile. So they needed Spanish, and they looked at 30 companies. There were 30 originally. So we needed to write a proposal, and then we needed to submit the proposal in Spanish as well. So in English and Spanish, which we did. And then I remember it got narrowed down to about 7 companies, and we were still in the running. We needed to submit samples and all kinds of things. And then I remember when it was just down to a couple of us, and we went to their office in Plano, Texas, and met with their purchasing department and convinced them to take us. And it wasn't easy because that was our first big meeting presentation, and it was for what we knew would be $1 million worth of business. And I was nervous, I was scared, I knew how much was riding on it, but we got in there and we did it, and boy, was that a wonderful feeling. The best.
Why do you think they chose you over all the other people who were going for this account?
Sure. At that point, we had been in business about a year, and they saw, wow, these owners, it was my partner and me, they really care. They're going to do whatever it takes. Because as I said, we were working 100, 120 hours a week. We were doing whatever the client needed. And then we had a network of translators, of course, because that's how the business runs, of subcontractors. But they saw we were going to do whatever was necessary as far as showing up and, providing service, as far as quality. We sold them on our quality. And so they thought, okay, they have the advantages of being owners and really caring, the advantages of a small company, but the reach of a larger company, because we had at that point several thousand freelancers, subcontractors that we worked with on a per project basis. They saw from our samples, we delivered quality. And then the last piece of it is, now I remember, we said, we'll open an office in Dallas if that would be helpful to you. And that was actually what we ended up doing. We said, yes. And we grew to over 100 offices around the globe. But we did that a number of times with clients. I remember when we got Qualcomm as a client in San Diego, we said, before we got them, we said, we can open a San Diego office for you. And we did ultimately open a San Diego office. So that was helpful. And opening offices is not nearly as big a deal as it seems. Like for us, we opened it as a one-person office in an executive suite situation. And then we said to the person who was running the office, okay, you sell $50,000 a month for 3 consecutive months, and then you can bring on a second person, and then the two of you sell $120,000 for 3 consecutive months. You can bring on a third, and so on. So the commitment was low. As far as the costs were low, but the upside was high. So we were still working with them from New York, but we had that office. And had they said, we want to be dealing with the Dallas person, we would have moved it over to them the moment they did. But for a period of time, at least, it was us from New York. And the last thing I'll say is JCPenney, I dealt with 75 people there. So that was back in the day before translation needs were centralized in any way. And that's just what I did. And the point is, it's all about service, right? That's really the point of the whole thing. It was about providing the best service and doing whatever the client needed.
So it's almost like you sold the deal and then figured out how to service the client after the fact. And that feels like how you built the whole business. Is that right?
That's exactly how we built the whole business.
Wow.
That is so much how we built the whole business. And I think that really is. Obviously, I think that's the best way to build the business because that's how we did it. Because I think...
So it can be self-financed that way, right? It can be financed by your clients as opposed to having to go out and get funding and then try to figure out a way how to bring a return to those people who are giving you money. You can say, I'm going to sell our services, then we'll figure out how to provide the service with the money they're paying me by opening an office and getting people. And then obviously, hopefully the profit's big enough where you keep growing and growing.
Yeah, yes. And that's exactly what we did. And I am such a proponent of that because we saw people in the 90s before with the dot-com boom and before the dot-com bubble burst. And even now, people focusing so much on funding, getting that funding, writing the business plan and meeting with investors and talking about how hard it is, which I'm sure it is hard. I think just writing the business plan is hard. And we didn't do that. Instead, we just focused, as I said, on sales and bringing in a project and turning that project into multiple projects and multiple projects into a relationship. And that's how the company was funded organically. And I think that's so important because now, as I said, people focus on funding, but what about revenue? What about profit? If they get the funding and they are not quickly getting the clients or the revenue and the profit, they're going to go out of business even with all that funding. So I feel like it can get neglected, and that's why this was a great way to go for us. And I highly recommend doing it this way.
I love that style of building a business. I think it just feels more natural, and it's still, there's still risk, but it's a more measured risk, and it's all also more, takes more responsibility on you and on the sales leaders, which have to be the founders of the company, which you are. Speaking of sales, that was my first job for 12 years after I got done playing football after college, and so I have a very soft spot because it's very hard. But I don't think there's, for me at least, there couldn't have been a better way to step foot into the professional world than having to sell. I was in a cubicle, I was smiling and dialing, similar to what you did, and it was so hard. But once you got the hang of it and got good at it and won the awards and got promoted, man, how cool is that? And the skills you develop doing that translate to pretty much everything else you're ever going to do in life, because you're always going to be selling this. So I just love, Liz, to get your take on your overall philosophy on sales, the profession of selling, and how you approached it, and obviously did it so well that you built yourself into be one of the youngest, richest self-made women of all time.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, unfortunately, not so young. But you're right. No, it was all about sales. And I agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. I think selling is such a great foundation for all of us as we embark on our career. If you're not sure what you want to do, but there are some related to sales you like, I think it is such a great foundation. And I also, in high school, I had a telemarketing job for Time Magazine. I remember I was, smiling and dialing there. And then I had others. And then at the end of my time at the other translation company, it was all about, I was selling. So I agree with you. We did the same thing at our company where, as I mentioned, we just focused on selling, and we did it. And the other thing that I learned quickly is, even though the owner, the CEO should ideally be the most important salesperson as far as always selling, etc., I think it's really important to quickly build, as soon as you can pay for it, a sales team working alongside you. And that was definitely a route we took. And I think it's so incredibly important, because I meet entrepreneurs now who have amazing ideas. They're amazing salespeople, and they create the company and the infrastructure, but they are the salesperson. And they don't, either they don't put the money into the sales team, or they, for whatever reason, can't find the right people. And it can be difficult, but they don't focus on building the sales team. And that is really how you scale the company. And we did that early on. As soon as we could pay for it, we would put the money into sales and marketing. I think that's another thing I talk about. That's really where, as much as possible, if the profit needs to go, sales and marketing. And it's certainly where it went with us. We also aligned the compensation plans for the salespeople very much with their success, such that if they were successful, they could make a lot more money than they would at other companies in our industry, and even in any industry, because I believe in paying a commission that never sunsets, and then also having a low draw, so that they are very incentivized to sell. So, and if you want me to elaborate on any of that,
Please,
let me know.
I explained the commission that never sunsets as well as a low draw. Like, define that.
Yeah, sure. So, to the extent it's possible, if you can hire people who are paid a draw, but as low as they're willing to take. And back in the day, I mean, we would pay a $25,000 draw. I know now that sounds very low. Maybe now the number would be 50. But the point is, that's not what most salespeople are happy making, and perhaps they can barely live off it, right? So then do that, but then pay something like 10% commission, and pay it on the first job, and pay it on the job for the 5,000th job, that project, so that it's not only in the first year are they making that 10%, but 5 years later and 10 years later. And as we all know, that first year is by far the toughest. The first million is by far the toughest. So they may only get a handful of projects or a handful of clients in the early
They
days.
can build a
But
book, though. It's
then,
almost like building their own business
yes,
within a business. Yeah.
yes. And that's precisely how we did it. We said, okay, you go and open this office. And if you do the right things, and if you can sell 500,000 or $1 million in your first year, then you keep adding people as you can pay for them. And you may have 50 or 100 people after 5 or 10 years. And a lot of our people did, and they were paid in the way that I just suggested. So all about aligning the incentives so that when they're bringing in the business, they're making more than they would elsewhere. And I thought that was incredibly valuable. Beyond that, we had great sales training. We brought in a sales coach who I met early on. We brought him in about once a year. He was fabulous. Jack Daly, love him. He's amazing. I met him in the early or the mid 90s. As soon as I became a member of YEO, which it's called EO now, but it was Young Entrepreneurs Organization back then. But he was very helpful. And then it was all about the goals with deadlines and making it so the same way we required ourselves to make a certain number of phone calls in a day and send out a certain number of letters, requiring our people to do that as well. And that was incredibly important. And then the other thing is we had annual sales conferences, and I'm a big believer in that because when you have people dispersed all over the country or all over the world, you need to bring them together because they're people, they want to see each other. Also, they can share ideas, and also you can do formalized training. And then, of course, having something like a president's club or a platinum club, that's super valuable. And then I guess another thing is things like awards. We gave out lots of awards, and I'm such a believer in that at the summer parties, at the conferences, at the holiday parties. So a lot of public recognition as well.
Love it. I remember my very first national sales meeting. I only been at the company like 6 months, and so they had it called Circle of Excellence, which same thing as President's Club. And I heard the loud booming voice announcing these names. I saw people celebrating like crazy going up on stage, and all I thought was, it wasn't eligible, obviously, 6 months, so I had to be there a full year. And all I thought was, I have to get on that stage. Like, it was such a motivating event. And it made me proud of my company. I thought, this is really cool. I worked at a place called LexisNexis. This is amazing that to see how celebrated the top performers are. I was like, there's no way I'm not going to be up there. So like that stuff really works. And it wasn't even about the trip. The trip was cool too. Don't get me wrong. It was first class. It was amazing. But it was really just about being up there with your peers and being recognized among your peers as having done an excellent job. A great feeling. It made me feel similar to back to the sporting days of playing with teammates and winning games together. Like it was a similar feel to that. So I think that all that plays a huge role in building the culture and performance of a place.
That's right. Exactly. We had MVP awards. Yes, in sports. Yes, exactly. All kinds of awards like that based on numbers, based on success, based on, yes, client feedback. Absolutely. And you're right. I think that is so important to the culture of the company.
You have said before the ones who are successful are, quote, goal obsessed. And you said multiple times already, goals with deadlines. Can you share your overall philosophy on goal setting and maybe even get specific or use an example of the types of goals you'd set and then how you'd go about hitting those goals?
Sure. As far as in the early days when we were first starting to open offices, and actually over time, same thing. I remember before we had opened an office outside of New York, we said, okay, we've got to act like we have a boss here. We may not have any bosses. We don't have a board. It's just us. But what would we do if we were trying to build a company and we had a boss? We would tell them our plan for making that happen. So we would literally, and what we did is we said, okay, Q1 will open San Francisco. Q2 will open Chicago. Q3 will open DC. Q4 will open Atlanta. And then we did whatever we needed to do to make sure that happened. And as I said, it wasn't the hardest thing in the world because it could be internally funded. We started small with that one person in the executive suite, gave them goals that they needed to accomplish in order to be successful at our company. And people who didn't meet those goals, they left and we terminated them. It just didn't work out. But there are plenty of people who are incredibly entrepreneurial and are goal obsessed who want to be a part of that. And so that was one of the things we did related to goals. So again, I just want to make sure I'm giving you concrete examples. That was important as far as opening offices. Okay. Yeah. What else can I tell you? Yeah.
So there's, you set the goal, which is the result, right? But then the process of hitting the goal is what you do every day. It's, you don't hit a goal because you set it. You hit it because of the things you do each day, which then the result ends up being hopefully hitting the goal, right? So when you set goals, what's the next step? How do you like implement a system in order to make sure you achieve the goal?
And that was in the early days. I talk about 300 phone calls and 300 letters. And basically, it was a case of figuring out who to call. And then from the phone calls, figuring out who to send the letters to. But those were just numbers that stuck with us for a long time. And that as we hired people, we required those numbers. Now, over time, they evolved, they changed, email became a part of life, etc. But it was, or number of trade shows or number of in-person meetings, but there were a certain number each day and each week and each month to make them happen. Also, another thing that was super important is everybody had annual goals. Everybody, every single salesperson in the company had annual goals, and they were shared with everybody. And then how successful they were was also shared. So everything was very public. And we did whatever we needed to do to meet those goals. And each person did, and they figured it out. For example, a salesperson who needed to sell $1 million in a year. Okay, the question is how, break it down by month. And then how are you going to do this? Which clients are you going to focus on? And what are you going to do with those specific clients? So that's really the process. But we found we were goal obsessed, as I said, and our people were too, our leaders were too. And if by chance there was some issue and someone couldn't open an office in Tokyo because it was too hard to find the right person, and it was always harder outside of the US and certainly in Asia, it was the hardest to find the right people because we wanted foreign nationals there, we found ways around it. Either we would send a person from the US over and they would work with a person temporarily, or we would add a person in another office so that we could make our goals, or we would start a related line of business in order to make our goals. So again, it was always about making the numbers every single year over the entire more than 25 years I was with the company. And not that it's all about the numbers, because in the end, it's about happy employees and happy clients, right? But a company can't grow and survive without the revenues and the profits.
For sure. You mentioned hiring people and hiring all over the world. As your company grew, you need to hire more and more people, and then you start hiring people to run the business, to have big-time leadership roles. Liz, I'm curious, what are some of the must-have qualities that you had in your mind when you were looking to hire a leader, that they have to have this and this in order to be a leader on my team?
Sure. Someone who was super goal-oriented and who had achieved a lot in their life. They say the best indicator of future success is past performance. But so someone who was that type of person, but someone who was very hungry, someone who was very motivated, someone who had a lot of jobs in their life. And I guess as I talk about, this applies to both entry-level employees and leaders, because almost all of our promotion was from within. So the people we were hiring entry level, we were looking at to be future leaders. But okay, so very hungry, lots of work experience was incredibly valuable. I am not an athlete. I am very uncoordinated. However, I love people in sports because often they're more competitive. But I think a lot of us are incredibly competitive. Well, we're not athletes, but athletes were often appealing for that reason. But again, there's some very competitive people who are not athletes. Another quality that was so important and is so important to me is curiosity.
Yeah.
Genuine curiosity, desire to learn and improve every day. And that never ends. And I think that's so important for every single position, just to be a great employee, to be a great leader. So that is super important. And then someone who is innovative, who's a problem solver, who looks at a situation and thinks, okay, how can I make it better? And then another quality that I find so important and valuable, and actually yeah, Danny Meyer has a great quote about it. But it's service, having a service mentality. And that's not something you can really teach. Just some people, you meet them and you have your multiple interviews with them, and you see they are very service oriented. They are trying to please and make you happy, because that was obviously incredibly important for our salespeople, but also our production people. They needed to be very, very service oriented. And then I guess the last thing I'll say is integrity.
Yeah.
They have to be honest. You have to be able to trust them and know they're being truthful with you. And yeah, I mean, that you do the best you can and through in the interview process. And actually, and then of course there's background checks. I learned
Sure.
over time those are helpful as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
During the interview process, how, because you're getting everybody obviously on their best behavior, but how do you gauge of those? I wrote them all down, but of those ones, I'm curious how you gauge, because I think hiring is one of the hardest things all of us do as leaders, and we all have messed it up a ton, right? I know you wrote about it in Dream Big and Win, right? We all have. If you've hired for years, you have your stories. We all have, like, oh my goodness, I thought this was a superstar, and no. So how do you like sense, or maybe even what questions do you ask, or how do you move the dialogue along to find two qualities? These are ones that maybe I really like: hunger and curiosity. How can you sense that in the interview process? What do you ask? What do you do to say, I know it's a gut feel, and like it's hard to systematize this, but I asked this with a lot of successful leaders like yourself, Liz, to try to figure this out for myself. But hunger and curiosity, how do you figure that out during the interview process?
Sure. I always loved and still love people who've worked from an early age,
Yeah.
right? And people who've had lots of jobs. And often it's because they've needed to. And that is obviously wonderful, whether they've needed to or just chosen to. But yes, many jobs from an early age doing all kinds of things, and not just those jobs that are real jobs, where they're serving people, where they're not just sitting in an office with an unpaid internship that looks good on a resume that someone was able to get for them, but real jobs, and lots of them, ideally. Someone who's had to fund their own education. Yeah. Wonderful. Those people are usually hungrier, and someone who's not getting help from their family. And you can tell as you go through the process, someone who has gone to college and they've had to fund their education, or if maybe they haven't, or not to a large degree, but then they had a job during college because they needed to usually. So again, you see all those things in the interview. And then they also talk about what they asking about all that background experience, the job experience, what they've done, all of that. When they tell you about themselves, you can figure those things out. Another thing is, where do you want to be in 5 years? You can tell from that really what their long-term goals are and how hungry they are to grow within the company. And often they'll say things like, I want to be running a department. I want to make a lot of money. I want to, yes, be at this level in this company. And then of course they're enthusiastic about your company, and they love your company. And of course you want that. That's another quality. You want people who love your company. But I think the answer is asking what their future goals are, like where they want to be in 5 or 10 years, as far as the hunger thing. And then on the curiosity, that one, and I think we've probably all been through this, but interviewing people who don't ask questions. Yeah, we want people who have questions, who ask lots of questions, and not questions that they can see that are so obvious right on your website. Because in this day and age, they're websites. We didn't used to have that. But now asking questions about your company that are not so obvious, that they couldn't find on the website, and then asking questions about you and how you got to where you are, because that shows they are genuinely curious as well. And even, I think so. Those are some of
the curiosity one, Liz, is so big. I actually tried to keep very good track of all of my hires, and the notes, I saved all the notes from their interview, because I really wanted to try to deconstruct excellence when it comes to what does it look like in the interview process to then 3 years down the road, and I worked in sales and sales leadership, to then when they were overperformers. And one of the things when I did that project, and it was ongoing for many years, was the candidates who not the candidates who did not wait till the end and then opened up a notebook and asked 3 written questions that maybe somebody told them to ask, but the ones who had both the guts and the willingness to ask questions throughout that organically came up in their mind throughout the conversation, and it became more of a conversation and less of an interview. And to me, those candidates, I would take a special note, they seemed to perform much better down the road, that they had that level of kind of courage and curiosity combination that they did better. It's interesting the things you learn as you really dig into all of the data and the stories and the information that goes along with it.
Yeah, that is a great point, because you're right. Some of them just might be going through the kind of robotic, the process, like, okay, I need to show up for the interview. I answer their questions, then I make sure I open my book and come back to them with 3.
You've had them. Yeah.
Yes, but you're
I've
right.
been that person when I was brand new. It took me a little time to get used to it.
Me too. Oh, absolutely. I'm sure I was a terrible interviewer. I'm sure I asked no questions. I was just trying to get through the interview without falling apart. I'm sure.
Yes.
I'm sure. But you're right. That's a really great point, because it shows they're really listening and they're really taking it in. They're thinking, oh, wow, have you thought of this? Or they're genuinely interested, and they're paying attention, and they're trying to add value. I love that. And then, as you say, it's more of a conversation. Yeah. And then, so I think that's a wonderful point. I love that.
I was reading chapter 11, and you write about the 5 P's of leadership, which are passion, prioritization, pivoting, proactivity, and people. How did you come up with these 5 P's, and what makes them stand out? Passion, prioritization, pivoting, proactivity, and people.
I think they are the most important. The truth is, there are a lot of important qualities, but there are a lot of very important qualities. And passion, it's a lot easier to stick with something and do well at it if we love it.
Yep.
If we love it. I think there's some discussion, is that what people should do? But if there is a way you can find something you love and make money doing it, wonderful. Or if you're at a job and you don't love it, but you can find something in that company or one of the positions that where you are using your passion, I think that's a good one. If we focus on people for a moment, hiring is the hardest part, and it's what it makes your company amazing. And it's also, you can have challenges if you have the wrong people. But I think it's critical to hire like-minded people, but with different skills, because they can't have the same skills as you. You need people whose skills complement yours. And then, of course, there's the cliche, hire people who are smarter than you. I always feel with me, that wasn't hard at all. That was quite easy. But yes, it's so much about the people, because if they're clear on your company's vision and mission and goals, and then they help set them forth and evangelize them, they're going to take your company to the top. And it's about making sure they are clear. And then if they're good at what they do and they've been trained properly, getting out of their way and letting them do it. And I really believe that if you have the right people, the revenue and the profit will come. And they do. Again, these people need goals with deadlines, or else we're all just having a good time. Right. But yeah, I think the people is obviously the most important. And the point, I could talk about any of the others, but yeah, just to focus on one. That's the most important one. Yeah.
So I watched a video this morning. So you obviously have the right to always change your mind. But in this video, I think it's a few years old, it says your personal motto was act like a leader. It's okay to be bossy. Act like you have the job before you have it. A leader needs to take charge and be the boss. Can you expand on that, or share if that's how you feel when it comes to a personal motto for how you approach work?
Yeah. And I think there are times when you definitely need to act that way. And I think we all find that in our personal lives as well, right? Because if we're getting together with a friend or a group of friends, we're like, where should we go to dinner?
Somebody's got to make the call, right?
Yeah, somebody's got to make it. And we all want to be nice and service oriented. Oh, whatever you like. And the truth is, often we don't even care, right? It's more about being with the people. But someone's got to take charge and say, okay, this is what we're doing, and this is where we're meeting, just to get it done. And I think the same thing can happen in business. Not that the decisions could matter more, But at a certain point, it's about making a decision and going with it and acting like a leader because someone needs to do it. And I think if you do that before you're a leader, you're more likely to get the job because your peers or your boss can see you in that role. And so I think it's really important. I think at the same time, you can't be obnoxiously bossy
Yeah.
and not care what people think and not care about their opinions, because often the people who report to us know a lot better than we do. First of all, they may be smarter in some way, or always they're on the front line with the clients perhaps when we're not, or with their teams. So you need to listen to them, absolutely. And then you need to serve them, right? Because they're not going to want to work with someone who's just bossing them around and not caring what they think. But I think back to what I was saying in the first part of this answer, I think you need to act like it as far as getting things done. And then qualities in a leader are these kind of serving your people and getting input from your people and all of that. I think I learned over time that the best ideas were coming from our people. And so much of the innovation over the years came from our people. And whether it was just an idea they had as they were working on projects, or an idea a client of theirs gave them, we got so many of our wonderful ideas. And I believe in making it so promotions often relate to your people innovating. And we would have innovation contests. And the last thing I'll say is this, related to acting like the boss. One of my favorite questions to ask in a one-on-one meeting with an employee, and I had lots of those. I'm a huge believer in the one-on-one meetings, just talking about how they're feeling about everything, personally and professionally, and making sure they're getting what they need. But one of my favorite questions, both in person and when we did surveys, was, if you owned this company or were running this company, what would you do differently? And yeah, and that, you could say if you're being bossy and acting like you're in charge, you're not asking. But I think that is the most important question to ask your people on a very regular basis. And that's how wonderful ideas come about. And then when your employees see that you're actually rolling out their ideas, they feel empowered and they feel like, okay, I'm appreciated. This is a place I want to be.
Yeah. Did it come naturally to you to be the boss, to take command, to take charge, or is that something you had to grow into and learn?
I think I had to grow into it and learn. Yeah. I think I had to grow into it and learn. I did.
How did that work? How did you do that?
I knew what I wanted to do. As I said, I was very motivated, very ambitious. I thought, if I'm going to start a translation company, I want it to be the world's largest. That was my goal from day one. But it didn't mean I had the skills. It didn't mean I had the skills to manage the team.
Both the skills and the will, not just one or the other.
I think I had the will. I had the idea. That was the easy part. But yeah, I think it was through a lot of trial and error and making plenty of mistakes along the way. I think leadership is challenging for all of us, and there's so much to learn. And I read many books on leadership. I still do. Now I listen to podcasts too, now that we have podcasts. But I think it's constant learning. I think you never feel like you're completely adept at it. And I think, again, it was through making mistakes and then thinking, okay, can't do that again. I need to implement this, and then seeing what worked and then doing more of it. But yeah, I think it's a continual learning process. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure I'll ever be done. I don't expect to ever be done.
I love it. Love that outlook. The book that you wrote is called Dream Big and Win, Translating Passion into Purpose and Creating a $1 billion Business. Really well done, Liz. It's fun. It's entertaining. It's useful. So it checks all the boxes. I'm really appreciative of you writing it. Where would you send my viewers and listeners to learn more about you online?
Thank you. So as far as learning about me, I have a website, lizelting.com. My foundation also has a website, elizabethelting.org. And then as far as my book, Dream Big and Win, you can buy it on Amazon, and you can also buy it online at other retailers as well, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, etc. And then I'm on social media as well. Yes.
I really appreciate you being here and expanding on all of the work. We only touched on a small portion of the books, but I think we did hit on some really key points. But there's so much more to read, so I highly encourage people to check out the book and go much deeper because your story is amazing. There's a lot to it. What you've built and what you've done is it's just incredible, and you're still getting after it. So I love it, Liz. Thanks again for being here, and I'd love to continue our dialogue as we both progress.
Thank you so much. I would love that as well, Ryan. And it was fantastic speaking with you. Thank you so much for having me here today.